The Caribbean Sea in the late 17th century was calm only on the surface. Beneath the glittering sunlight and rolling blue waves lay a world soaked in fear, ambition, and blood. For sailors crossing these waters, peace was an illusion that could shatter at any moment. Every distant sail on the horizon carried a question that tightened the chest: merchant, navy, or pirate. The Spanish galleon moved slowly with the trade wind, its massive wooden body groaning, as if it already sensed danger. On deck, soldiers and sailors prepared in tense silence. Muskets were checked again and again, fingers trembling slightly as flints were tested. Cannon crews wiped sweat from their faces, not from heat alone, but from unease. The smell of salt mixed with gunpowder clung to the air. "Keep formation," the captain ordered, his voice firm but strained. Eyes on the sea. A young soldier leaned against the railing, staring at the endless water. In his mind, he saw stories told in taverns. Ships swallowed by fire, men dragged screaming onto pirate decks, captains hanged from their own masts. He swallowed hard. "Do you believe the stories?" he whispered to an older sailor beside him. The sailor didn't look away from the horizon. "Believe half," he said quietly. "Fear all." Far away, beyond what the Spanish could see, 3 ships cut through the water with deliberate intent. Their hulls were scarred, patched, and darkened by years of battle and storms. No flags flew from their masts. On the largest ship stood Captain Elias Vane, his coat faded, his face carved by sun and hardship. He watched the distant galleon through a spyglass, his expression unreadable. "Spanish silver ship," he said at last. "Heavy guns, heavy guards." A pirate near him laughed nervously. "Sounds like death, Captain." Vane lowered the glass. "Sounds like survival." Around him, pirates prepared with practiced efficiency. Blades were sharpened, pistols loaded. Some men muttered prayers, others curses. A drummer tapped a slow rhythm on the deck, not for ceremony, but to steady shaking hands. These men were not born monsters. Many had been sailors once, beaten by officers, starved by merchants, abandoned by empires. The sea had hardened them, stripped away mercy. "False colors ready," Vane ordered. "We sail as friends until we don't." The pirate ship raised a Spanish flag and angled toward the convoy. From a distance, it looked harmless, another ship riding the trade routes. On the galleon, tension eased just slightly. "Another escort?" a sailor asked. "Maybe," the captain replied, though doubt crept into his eyes. As the ships drew closer, the air grew thick and heavy. Seagulls scattered. The wind shifted. Somewhere deep in the hull, would creak like a warning. Then the flag dropped. Black cloth unfurled in the wind. A skull stared across the water. "Pirates!" a voice screamed. The first cannon fired before fear could fully take hold. The blast tore through the Spanish galleon's side, splintering wood and throwing men backward. Smoke swallowed the deck. Shouts turned to screams. "Return fire!" the captain roared. Spanish cannons thundered, ripping into the pirate ship's rigging. A mast cracked. A pirate was hurled into the sea, disappearing beneath the waves without a sound. Musket fire echoed across the water, sharp and relentless. On Vane's deck, chaos surrounded him, but he stood calm, shouting orders through the smoke. "Hold your line. Close the distance." The ships collided with a bone-shaking impact. Grappling hooks flew, biting into wood. Ropes tightened as pirates hauled themselves toward the enemy deck. The fight became brutal and intimate. Cutlasses clashed. Pistols fired at arm's length. A Spanish soldier stabbed forward, his face pale with terror, only to be struck down by a pirate wielding an axe. Blood soaked into the planks, mixing with seawater until the deck became slick and treacherous. "For the king!" a Spanish officer shouted, charging. Captain Vane met him blade to blade. Steel rang out. The officer fought with desperation, but desperation was not enough. Vane twisted, struck, and the man fell, eyes staring at nothing. Below deck, civilians huddled in darkness. A mother clutched her child, pressing his face into her chest to muffle his cries. Each explosion above felt like the world ending. The battle raged until the sun began to sink. One pirate ship burned fiercely, flames climbing its mast. Men jumped into the sea to escape the fire, some sinking under the weight of their own boots. On the Spanish side, resistance weakened as officers fell and cannons fell silent. At last, the fighting slowed. Smoke drifted across the water. Bodies lay scattered, unmoving. The sea rocked them gently, indifferent to who had lived or died. The pirates had won. Gold and silver were dragged onto their decks, chests heavy enough to bend backs and fuel dreams. Some pirates laughed wildly. Others stared silently at the dead, their victory hollowed by loss. Captain Vane stood at the rail, watching the burning galleon slip beneath the waves. The fire reflected in his eyes. "This victory will echo," he said quietly. "They will hunt us now." No one argued. The Caribbean was not finished with them. Empires would respond. Navies would rise. And the sea, which had given them everything, would one day demand its price. The age of ruthless raiders had begun, not as legend, but as blood-soaked reality. Dawn came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over the wreckage. The Caribbean sea was quiet again, but it was the uneasy silence that followed slaughter. Smoke still drifted across the water in thin gray veils. Broken masts floated like dead trees, and bodies rose and fell with the tide. Faces turned toward a sky that no longer mattered to them. On the pirate ships, victory felt heavy. Men moved carefully, limping across blood-stained decks, tending wounds with torn cloth and rum. Groans mixed with the creak of timbers. The smell of burnt wood clung to everything. A young pirate stared at the sea where his closest friend had vanished during the battle. He said he'd buy land, the young man murmured. Said he was done with the sea. No one answered him. Captain Elias Vane gathered the surviving officers near the helm. His voice was low, controlled, but edged with urgency. "We don't linger," he said. "Spanish patrols will smell the smoke by noon." One man frowned. "We lost a ship, Captain, and men." Vane nodded once. "And if we stay, we lose everything." The pirates worked fast. Chests of silver were secured below deck. Captured weapons were sorted. Prisoners, those who had not resisted, were dragged forward, hands bound, eyes wide with terror. A Spanish sailor spat blood and looked up at Vane. "You'll hang for this," he said. "The crown will see to it." Vane crouched so they were eye to eye. "Men like me don't hang," he replied calmly. "We sink or we burn." The pirate fleet turned east, sails snapping as the wind filled them. Behind them, the remains of the Spanish convoy faded into the haze, but its consequences did not. 2 days later, in Havana, alarm bells rang. Spanish officers crowded into a stone chamber, maps spread across a long table. Charcoal marks circled trade routes, ports, and islands. Another convoy destroyed, an admiral said, his jaw clenched. Same tactics, same brutality. "They are growing bolder," another officer replied. "These are no longer scattered thieves. This is organized war." Orders were written. Ships were commissioned. Bounties were placed on pirate captains whose names now spread through every port like disease. Elias Vane's name was written carefully, underlined twice. Back at sea, the pirates felt the shift immediately. Merchant ships began traveling in larger convoys. Cannons appeared on vessels that once carried only sugar and tobacco. Ports that once welcomed pirates with open arms now hesitated, fearful of royal retribution. At a hidden cove, Vane's crew divided the spoils. Silver coins spilled across the sand, glinting in the torchlight. Some men laughed, grabbing handfuls, their joy desperate and loud. Others sat apart, staring into the darkness. A veteran pirate spoke quietly to Vane. "This path ends one way, Captain. You know that." Vane looked toward the sea. "All paths end," he said. "This one just ends faster." The next battle came sooner than expected. A week later, while stalking a French merchant vessel, Vane's lookout shouted a warning. Sails to the north. Warships. Spanish frigates cut through the waves with deadly precision. This was no merchant defense. This was a hunt, hard to port. Vane shouted, "All guns ready." Cannons roared again, but this time the pirates were outmatched. Spanish ships moved in disciplined formation, their volleys timed, their aim precise. A cannonball ripped through Vane's hull, killing 2 men instantly. Another shattered the rail, spraying splinters like shrapnel. "Return fire!" someone screamed. The pirates fought with fury, but fear crept in. Smoke blinded them. Commands were lost in the chaos. One pirate ship took heavy damage, water pouring through its side. "We can't win this," the first mate shouted. Vane's mind raced. He looked at the wind, the waves, the narrow passage between islands ahead. "Break formation," he ordered. "Scatter. Use the reefs." The pirate ship split, racing toward the shallow waters where larger warships struggled to follow. One Spanish frigate ran aground, its hull screaming as it tore against coral. Cheers erupted from the pirates, brief and bitter. But not all escaped. One pirate vessel was caught, surrounded, its guns silenced. From a distance, Vane watched as Spanish soldiers boarded it. He could hear nothing, but he knew what followed. No mercy, no rescue. A pirate near him whispered, "We should go back." Vane closed his eyes for a moment. Then he shook his head. "If we turn back, we all die." The sea swallowed the captured ship as flames rose into the sky. The pirates sailed on, hearts heavy, victory now stained with loss and guilt. That night, silence ruled the deck. No songs, no laughter, only the sound of waves and the distant crackle of burning wreckage. A young pirate finally spoke. Was it worth it? No one answered. Days later, the pirates reached a remote island to repair their ships. Word arrived with a smuggler. Executions in Havana. Men hanged in cages along the harbor as a warning. Their crime, sailing under black flag. The message was clear. The war had changed. What began as raids for survival had become open conflict against empires. There would be no peace, no return to normal life. Captain Vane stood on the shore at sunset, watching the waves roll endlessly forward. He knew now what the sea demanded in return for freedom. It demanded everything. And still tomorrow they would sail again. The island was little more than a scar of rock and jungle rising from the sea, hidden by reefs sharp enough to tear a hull apart. For pirates, that made it perfect. Ships lay anchored in shallow water, while men worked day and night, hammering planks into place, sealing wounds in the wood with tar and cloth. Every strike of the hammer echoed like a countdown. Rain fell in short, violent bursts. It washed blood from the decks, but not from memory. Captain Elias Vane walked among his crew, watching faces more closely than repairs. Men spoke in low voices, glancing toward the sea as if expecting sails to rise from the mist at any moment. Hunger and exhaustion sharpened tempers. Victory no longer tasted sweet. It tasted like iron. A messenger arrived at dawn in a small canoe, breathless and shaking. "Port Royal," he said. "They're talking about you there. Governors, admirals, they want your head." Vane said nothing. He already knew. By mid-morning, another ship approached the island cautiously, flying a neutral flag. It was smaller than Vane's vessels, sleek and fast. The man who stepped ashore wore fine boots and carried himself like someone used to giving orders. "Captain Vane," he said with a thin smile. "Name's Robert Ashcroft. Privateer." Some pirates spat at the word. Ashcroft ignored them. "England is offering commissions," he continued. "Legal raids. Royal pardon. You and your men could stop running." A murmur rippled through the crew. A pardon meant ports, food, sleep without fear. Vane studied Ashcroft carefully. "And the price?" Ashcroft's smile faded. "Spanish targets only. And information, names, routes." Silence fell. One pirate stepped forward. "That's betrayal." Ashcroft shrugged. "That's survival." Vane dismissed him with a gesture. "You have your answer." Ashcroft left, but his words stayed behind like rotten wood. That night, arguments broke out. Some men wanted pardon. Others wanted blood. Blades were drawn before cooler heads pulled them apart. "You're leading us to the gallows," one pirate shouted. Vane faced him calmly. "You chose this life. Don't blame me when it shows its teeth." Before dawn, 3 men deserted, stealing a small boat and vanishing into the fog. The next attack came days later, swift and unexpected. A Dutch merchant convoy, heavily armed but slow. Vane struck hard, using speed and surprise. Cannons thundered. Smoke smothered the morning light. This time, the pirates boarded with fury. There was no hesitation, no restraint. Resistance was crushed brutally. When it was over, the decks were slick with blood, and the surviving merchants knelt in terror. One begged, voice breaking, "We'll pay. Anything." A pirate raised his blade. Vane stopped him. "Take the cargo," he ordered. "Leave the ship." The merchant stared in disbelief. "Go," Vane said, "and tell them what happened here." Fear, Vane knew, traveled faster than ships. But cruelty had consequences. As the pirates sailed away, smoke rose from the horizon again, naval smoke. Spanish and English warships, now working together. The empires had decided piracy was no longer useful. The chase lasted hours. Cannonballs tore through water, sending towering splashes skyward. A pirate ship lost its rudder and spun helplessly. Men screamed as it drifted out of formation. "We can't save them," the helmsman yelled. Vane clenched his jaw. Full sail. Behind them, the trapped ship exploded in fire and wood. Another sacrifice to the sea. By nightfall, the remaining pirate ships hid among mangroves. Engines of war reduced to ghosts in the darkness. Men collapsed where they stood, shaking, silent. A young pirate finally broke down, sobbing openly. "I didn't think it would be like this," he cried. "I thought we were free." An older man sat beside him. "Freedom always has a bill," he said softly, "and it comes due." Days passed. Food dwindled. Powder ran low. Rum was rationed. Whispers of mutiny crept through the crew like disease. One night, Vane woke to the sound of steel leaving his sheath. He rolled just as a blade slashed through the air where his neck had been. The attacker hesitated. That moment saved Vane's life. The fight was brutal and short. When it ended, the would-be mutineer lay bleeding on the deck, staring up at the stars. "I wanted to live," the man gasped. "So did I," Vane replied. At dawn, the body was committed to the sea. No words, no ceremony. The crew watched in silence as the water closed over him. That day, Vane addressed his men. His voice carried over the deck, steady and unbroken. "The world wants us dead," he said. "Kings, admirals, merchants. They will not stop. If you stay with me, understand this, there is no turning back." Some men lowered their eyes. Others met his gaze. "We sail forward," Vane continued, "or we sink." The decision was made without a vote. Sails were raised. As the ship slipped back into open water, the Caribbean stretched before them, beautiful and merciless. The war was no longer about gold or glory. It was about endurance, and the sea was watching. The sea grew restless as the weeks dragged on, as if it sensed the rising violence carried upon its surface. Trade winds shifted unpredictably, and storms gathered with little warning. For the pirates, every dark cloud felt like pursuit. Every sail on the horizon was an omen. Captain Elias Vane pushed his fleet southward, avoiding familiar ports. Once welcoming harbors now displayed gallows at the water's edge. Iron cages hung from docks, some still occupied, their skeletal occupants swaying gently above the tide. The message from the empires was unmistakable. On board, discipline tightened. Watches doubled. Powder was guarded as carefully as gold. Sleep came in short, uneasy stretches, broken by dreams of fire and drowning. One night, as rain hammered the deck, a lookout whispered urgently, "Lights ahead." Through the downpour, lanterns flickered. An isolated settlement, small but active. A French colonial outpost, lightly defended, wealthy from sugar shipments. Temptation spread through the crew like heat. "We take it fast," Vane said. "No delays." Boats were lowered silently. Oars dipped into the water with practiced rhythm. Thunder masked their approach. They struck just before dawn. The first guard fell without a sound. Then chaos erupted. Muskets cracked. Dogs barked wildly. Civilians ran screaming through muddy streets as pirates flooded the settlement. Doors were kicked in. Barrels smashed open. Sugar and rum spilled into the rain. A French officer rallied a handful of soldiers near the dock. "Hold the line," he shouted. A pirate answered with a pistol shot. The fight was short and savage. When it ended, smoke rose from burning storehouses. The pirates dragged their plunder back to the boats, breathless, laughing with the raw relief of survival. But something had shifted. A pirate grabbed a crying settler by the collar. "Where's the rest?" he demanded. Vane intervened, shoving the man away. "We take goods," he said sharply, "not people." The pirate hesitated, then backed down, but resentment flashed in his eyes. By midday, sails appeared. Warships. "Too soon," someone whispered. The pirates fled into open water, overloaded and slow. Cannon fire chased them, tearing holes in sails and flesh alike. A lucky shot snapped a mast clean in half. The ship lurched, helpless. "Abandon her," Vane ordered. Men leapt into the sea, clinging to floating debris. The pirates watched from a distance as the crippled ship was captured. Prisoners were dragged aboard Spanish decks in chains. That night, silence returned, but it was colder now. Supplies were divided. Some men drank heavily. Others sharpened blades obsessively. Tension coiled tighter with each passing hour. Then came the rumor. One of the captured pirates had talked. He had given names. Ports, safe routes, hidden coves. The next attack confirmed it. As the pirates slipped into what they believed was a secure channel, cannon fire erupted from both sides. Ships burst from behind islands, their flags snapping in the wind. It was an ambush. "Traitor," someone screamed. The battle was relentless. No room to maneuver. Smoke blinded gunners. Splinters flew like knives. Men fell screaming into red water. Vane fought like a man already condemned. Orders came sharp and fast. "Board them," he shouted. "Take their guns." Pirates leapt across decks, roaring, desperate. Steel rang. Bodies piled. The fight dissolved into chaos. A young pirate froze, staring at the carnage. "Move!" Vane shouted, shoving him aside just as a musket fired. The ball tore through where the boy's head had been. The pirates broke through one warship, seized its cannons, and turned them against the others. The sea exploded with fire. One enemy vessel retreated, its hull crippled, but the cost was brutal. When the smoke cleared, only one pirate ship remained seaworthy. The rest burned or sank. The survivors gathered on the remaining deck, bloodied, hollow-eyed. Half the crew was gone. No one celebrated. That night, they buried the dead at sea. One by one, bodies slid into the water, wrapped in torn sails. Names were spoken until voices broke. A pirate approached Vane quietly. "This is the end," he said. "We can't outrun them anymore." Vane stared at the dark horizon. "Then we don't run." At dawn, he gathered the men. "They expect us to scatter," he said, "to hide, to beg for mercy." He shook his head. "We strike one last time. Hard enough to be remembered." Fear and resolve mixed in their eyes. The sea stretched ahead, vast and uncaring. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, dark and heavy. As the lone pirate ship sailed toward them, every man aboard understood the truth. Survival was no longer the goal. Legacy was. The storm met them before nightfall. Wind tore at the sails like a living thing, screaming to the rigging as waves rose higher than the deck. Rain struck like thrown gravel. The lone pirate ship pitched violently, its timbers groaning under the strain. Some men prayed. Others laughed bitterly, daring the sea to finish what the empires had started. "Reef the sails," someone shouted. Too late. A wave slammed across the deck, sweeping two men off their feet. One vanished instantly. The other clung to a rope, screaming until strong hands hauled him back from the edge. Captain Elias Vane stood near the helm, soaked, his hair plastered his face. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the crew in brief flashes, faces hollowed by exhaustion and loss. "This storm will hide us," Vane yelled over the wind. "Hold her steady." Hours passed like years. When dawn finally broke, the sea was calmer, but the damage was clear. The ship had survived, but barely. Torn sails, a cracked mast, leaks below deck. They limped toward a small, uncharted island, running the ship aground deliberately to avoid sinking. Men collapsed into the sand, too tired even to speak. For 2 days they repaired what they could, using wreckage in desperation. Food was almost gone. Powder was low. Every man knew this was the final stretch. On the 3rd day, a sail appeared. Then another. Warships. The pirates froze, staring at the horizon. "They followed us," someone whispered. Vane didn't move. "No," he said quietly. "They've been waiting." There was no escape now. The ship could not outrun them. The island offered no cover. The sea, once their ally, lay wide open. Vane gathered the crew one last time. "No lies," he said. "We are outnumbered, outgunned." A murmur passed through the men. "But we choose how this ends." He looked at each face. Some nodded, some trembled. No one left. The pirates loaded their remaining cannons. Powder was divided carefully, each charge precious. Blades were strapped tight. Pistols checked once, no second chances left. As the warships closed in, drums began to beat aboard the pirate ship. Not ordered, instinctive, a slow, steady rhythm, echoing like a heartbeat. Spanish colors flew proudly from the lead ship, English flags from the others. Old enemies united now. A voice carried across the water through a speaking trumpet. "Surrender and be spared." Silence answered. Then Vane raised his hand. "Fire." The first volley tore across the water. One warship took a direct hit, its deck exploding in smoke and flame. Cheers erupted from the pirates, raw and fierce. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Cannon fire crashed into the pirate ship from all sides. Which shattered, men were flung into the air. The deck became a storm of splinters and blood. Still, the pirates fought. They returned fire again and again, reloading with shaking hands, shouting defiance into the smoke. When cannons were destroyed, they fired muskets. When powder ran out, they drew steel. Enemy ships closed the distance. Grappling hooks bit into the pirate hull. "Here they come," someone yelled. Boarding began. Spanish and English soldiers poured onto the deck, disciplined, relentless. The fight became chaos. Steel clashing, bodies colliding, screams swallowed by gunfire. Vane moved to the battle, like a man already dead. He fought without hesitation, cutting down attackers, pushing forward even as wounds opened across his arms and side. A soldier lunged at him. Vane blocked, twisted, struck. Another came. Then another. A pirate fell beside him, clutching his stomach. "Captain," the man gasped. "Tell them we didn't beg." Vane nodded once. "They'll remember." The deck grew slick with blood. Smoke burned the lungs. Shouts turned hoarse. One by one, pirates fell surrounded, overwhelmed. At last, Vane stood with only a handful of men remaining. The ship was lost. Flames licked the mast. The sea crept closer through shattered planks. A Spanish officer approached cautiously, blade raised. "It's over," he said. "Yield." Vane looked around, at the dead, the burning deck, the endless sea beyond. He laughed softly. "No," he said, with his remaining strength. He drove his blade forward one final time. The officer fell. Moments later, Vane was struck from behind. He fell to his knees, vision blurring, the world narrowing to the sound of waves and fire. Soldiers surrounded him, weapons raised. The battle was finished. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the black flag was torn down. The pirate ship burned fiercely, its smoke rising high into sky. The war was over, but the story was not. As Vane was dragged away in chains, he looked back once more at the sea that had given him everything and taken all away. The Caribbean rolled on, indifferent, eternal. And somewhere beneath its surface, the ghosts of ruthless raiders drifted forever, reminding the world that freedom, once tasted, is never surrendered without blood. Chains cut into flesh with every movement. Captain Elias Vane was dragged aboard the Spanish flagship as the pirate vessel burned behind him, its flames reflected in the darkening sea. The cheers of soldiers rang hollow, exhausted rather than triumphant. This was not a clean victory. It had been earned inch by inch, body by body. Below deck, the air was thick with sweat, iron, and fear. Captured pirates were thrown into the hold, shackled to beams slick with seawater. Some were barely conscious. Others stared silently into the dark, their faces already stripped of hope. A wounded pirate beside Vane whispered, "They'll hang us." Vane didn't answer. He already knew. The voyage to Havana took days. Days of heat, hunger, and silence broken only by the groan of the ship and the coughs of the dying. One man succumbed to his wounds and was hauled out without ceremony, tossed into the sea like refuse. No prayers followed. Above deck, officers debated their fate. "These men made war on the crown," one Spanish commander said. "They deserve public execution." "England will want examples," replied an English officer. "Let the ports see what becomes of pirates." When Havana's harbor came into view, the city rose like a fortress of stone and fear. Cannons lined the walls. Ships filled the bay. And along the docks, iron cages already hung, empty but waiting. Word spread quickly. The pirate captain was alive. Crowds gathered as the prisoners were marched through the streets in chains. Some people spat. Others stared in grim fascination. Children were lifted onto shoulders to see the men who had defied empires. A woman shouted, "Murderers!" Another whispered, "Legends." Vane walked upright, ignoring the jeers, his eyes fixed ahead. Blood had dried on his clothes. His wounds burned, but he showed no sign of pain. In the fortress prison, interrogations began. Names were demanded. Safe harbors. Allies. Routes. Vane said nothing. A Spanish officer slammed his fist against the table. "You think silence will save you?" Vane met his gaze. "Nothing saves a man like me." The executions began at dawn. One by one, pirates were taken from the cells and led to the docks. Drums beat slowly. The crowd fell silent as the first noose was tightened. The trapdoor dropped. The rope snapped tight. Some prisoners screamed. Others laughed bitterly. One sang until the rope cut off his breath. Vane watched from behind iron bars, his expression unreadable. When his turn came, the guards hesitated. This one mattered more. He was marched out under heavy guard, chains clanking with every step. The harbor smelled of salt and death. Ships' bells rang faintly in the distance. The gallows stood tall, stark against the sky. An officer read the charges aloud. Piracy, murder, rebellion against the crown. Each word echoed across the water. "Any final words?" the officer asked. Vane scanned the crowd. Sailors, merchants, soldiers, faces drawn by fear of what he represented. He spoke calmly. "You call me a monster," he said, "but I am what your world made me. You sent us across the sea for gold. You whipped us, starved us, abandoned us. And when we took what we were owed, you called it crime." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The sea doesn't belong to kings," Vane continued. "It never did." The officer gestured sharply. "Enough." The hood was placed over Vane's head. The rope tightened. For a moment, everything was still. Then the trapdoor fell. The crowd watched as the body went limp, swaying gently above the harbor. The message was clear. Piracy would not be tolerated. By evening, the cages were filled. Bodies hung in iron frames along the docks, left to rot under the sun as warnings to any who dared follow the same path. And yet, something unexpected happened. In taverns at night, sailors whispered Vane's name with something like reverence. Stories spread faster than fear, of a captain who never begged, who fought until the end, who faced death standing tall. Across the Caribbean, pirates listened. Some surrendered. Many fled. But a few felt something ignite inside them. Months later, piracy did not disappear. It changed. Raids became sharper, faster. Crews scattered, then regrouped. New captains rose, inspired by the lessons written in blood. Governors noticed. Admirals complained. The war at sea dragged on, costly and endless. In Havana, the cages rusted slowly. Bones bleached white under sun. And far beyond the reach of empires, The Caribbean rolled on, vast, beautiful, unforgiving, carried with it the memory of ruthless raiders who refused to kneel. The man was dead. The idea was not. Years passed, but the sea did not forget. The execution of Captain Elias Vane was meant to be an ending, a full stop written in rope and bone. Instead, it became a beginning whispered from deck to deck, port to port, carried on rum-soaked breath and salt air. In the months after Havana, patrols increased. Spanish frigates prowled trade routes. English governors issued new laws, harsher punishments, faster trials. The Caribbean became crowded with warships, their flags snapping like warnings in the wind. But fear alone could not tame the sea. In hidden coves and mangrove swamps, former crewmen of Vane scattered like embers. Some took new names. Others joined different ships. A few vanished forever into quiet lives ashore. Yet, when they spoke of the past, they spoke of him. He never bowed. One said quietly in a tavern in Nassau, "He chose the rope over surrender," another replied. Among those listening was a woman known only as Mara Calder. She had sailed as a navigator under different captains, rarely staying long, always watching, always learning. Vane's story reached her not as legend, but as instruction. Empires fear symbols, she said one night, tracing routes on a rough map. So we become smoke. We hit once, vanish, and let fear do the rest. Her crew was small. Fast ships, no flags, no mercy for warships, no cruelty toward civilians. Piracy evolved, sharper and colder. Spanish merchants complained of attacks that left no bodies, only empty holds and unanswered questions. English officers cursed enemies they could never catch. The war at sea entered a new phase. Meanwhile, Havana wore its warning proudly. The cages remained along the docks, though the bodies inside were long gone. Sailors avoided looking at them, but children pointed and asked questions. "Why are they still there?" one asked his father. "So, we remember," the man replied. "And so they do." Yet memory works both ways. In Port Royal, an old pirate who had once sailed under Vane stared at the sea and laughed bitterly. "They think hanging a man kills what he stood for," he said. "Fools." One night, a convoy vanished entirely. No wreckage, no survivors. Only silence. The governor demanded answers. None came. In response, the empires escalated again. Joint fleets, shared intelligence, rewards for informants. The Caribbean turned into a chessboard, every move answered with force. And still, piracy endured. Not because it was glorious, because it was necessary. Sailors continued to desert brutal captains. Prisoners escaped plantations. Soldiers abandoned uniforms. The sea absorbed them all and reshaped them into something harder. In a storm years later, a young sailor clung to wreckage as lightning split the sky. A pirate ship found him, hauled him aboard. "Why save me?" he asked between coughs. The pirate shrugged. "Because someone once saved me." History did not record his name. It recorded patterns. Governors rotated. Admirals retired. Ships rotted. But the tension between order and freedom never eased. The Caribbean remained a wound empire, could not fully close. In Havana, the cages were finally taken down. Not out of mercy, but because they no longer frightened anyone. Sailors passed the docks without slowing. The lesson had faded. But at night, when the wind shifted just right, old sailors swore they heard something in the creak of ships and the crash of waves. A voice that never begged. A reminder that the sea answers to no crown, and that once a man chooses freedom over fear, even death cannot fully silence him. The ruthless raiders were gone. Their legacy sailed on. The Caribbean entered a quieter season, but it was a kind of quiet that made men uneasy. Trade ships sailed heavier with guards. Cannons were kept loaded even in calm waters. Captains slept with pistols within reach. The sea looked the same, but everyone knew it was watching. Mara Calder's name began to circulate, softly at first, then with growing urgency. She never announced herself. No black flag, no warning shots. Her ship appeared at dawn or dusk, struck with precision, and vanished before reinforcements could respond. She studied patrol routes, weather patterns, and human weakness with equal care. Speed is mercy, she told her crew. For us and for them. Not all pirates agreed. Elsewhere, brutality returned in force. A captain calling himself Black Rowan left burn holes and broken bodies in his wake. Civilians died. Crews were slaughtered even after surrender. The Empire seized on his violence as proof that pirates were monsters beyond reason. He's going to bring the full weight of the world down on all of us, a pirate muttered in a Tortuga tavern. Mara listened but said nothing. She understood the pattern. Excess always invited annihilation. The response came swiftly. A new Spanish admiral arrived in the Caribbean with orders to end piracy completely. He brought faster ships, better intelligence, and a policy of total destruction. Any vessel suspected of aiding pirates was seized. Any island that harbored them was punished. Villages burned. In one coastal settlement, soldiers dragged fishermen into the square and demanded names. None were given. The gallows went up before sunset. Word spread quickly. Fear returned, not just of pirates, but of empires. On the open sea, Mara intercepted a small English courier ship. The captain surrendered immediately, hands raised, voice shaking. "We carry no gold," he said. "Only letters." Mara hesitated, then ordered the papers brought to her. As she read, her jaw tightened. The letters detailed coordinated hunts, informant payments, and planned strikes on suspected pirate havens. "They're tightening the net," one of her crew said. Mara folded the letters carefully. "Then we cut it." That night, her ship slipped into a harbor thought to be secure for the empires. Disguised as merchants, they docked briefly, long enough to sabotage rudders, spike cannons, and poison water supplies. By morning, 3 warships were crippled without a single shot fired. The message was subtle but devastating. Panic followed. Accusations flew. Officers blamed one another. Trust eroded. In response, the empires doubled down. Patrols increased again. Rewards grew larger. Torture was quietly authorized. A captured pirate broke under pain and gave up a name, an island rumored to shelter Mara's crew. The fleet arrived at dawn. They found the island empty. But as they anchored, the sea erupted. Hidden charges detonated beneath 2 ships, tearing open hulls. From the smoke, Mara's ship appeared, cannons firing at point-blank range. The ambush was brutal and brief. 1 warship sank in minutes. Another limped away, its decks strewn with dead. Mara did not pursue. She watched from the rail as survivors struggled in the water. "Leave them," she ordered. A crew member frowned. "They'll hunt us again." "Yes," Mara replied, "but they'll remember today." Still, the cost mounted. Supplies were harder to find. Safe ports vanished. Crews grew tired. The sea demanded constant vigilance, constant sacrifice. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, an older pirate spoke quietly. "We're running out of places to run." Mara nodded. "Then we don't run forever." She began planning differently, not raids, but exits. Smaller crews, hidden caches, escape routes inland. The age of large pirate fleets was ending. Survival now meant invisibility. One by one, her crew dispersed. Some vanished into jungle settlements. Others took new identities aboard merchant ships. A few chose to keep sailing, alone and nameless. On her final night at sea, Mara stood alone on deck. The wind was gentle, the water calm. She thought of Vane, of cages rusting in Havana, of how every empire believed it could end a story by killing its characters. She smiled faintly. At dawn, she scuttled her ship in a shallow bay, watching it settle into the water like a sleeping animal. Then she turned inland and walked away without looking back. Years later, historians would argue about when piracy truly ended in the Caribbean. Some pointed to treaties, others to economics, others to overwhelming naval power. But sailors knew better. Piracy didn't end. It thinned. It adapted. It dissolved into rumor and shadow. And whenever a ship vanished without explanation, whenever a convoy arrived lighter than it left, someone would lower their voice and say, "The sea still has its own laws." The ruthless raiders were no longer armies. They were ghosts. And ghosts, once born, are very hard to kill. Time wore down the edges of fear, as it always did. The Caribbean entered a new century, and the world beyond it began to change. Empires shifted their attention toward inland colonies, plantations, and expanding markets. The sea remained vital, but the panic that once ruled it dulled into routine vigilance. Yet routines create blind spots. Merchant ships grew larger, heavier, slower. Profits mattered more than caution. Crews were underpaid. Discipline slipped. The conditions that had once birthed piracy quietly returned. In a port outside Cartagena, a former pirate named Tomas Alvarez worked as a dockhand, his hands scarred, his back bent. Few knew he had once sailed under Captain Vane. Fewer still recognized a fire that still lived behind his tired eyes. When a merchant captain struck him for working too slowly, something old stirred. That night, Tomas met 3 men in a candlelit storehouse. All were sailors. All carried the same resentment, the same hunger. "We don't need flags," Tomas said. "We don't need names." They took a small sloop, fast and unremarkable. Their first raid was quick and quiet, a coastal trader. No deaths, just enough cargo to remind them who they were. The sea remembered them instantly. Elsewhere, piracy resurfaced in fragments, isolated attacks, unclaimed strikes. Governors dismissed them as banditry, nothing like the wars of the past. They were wrong. In Kingston, a naval clerk noticed discrepancies. Ships delayed, cargo missing without explanation, no wreckage, no witnesses. "These aren't accidents," he muttered. By the time reports reached the Admiralty, it was too late. Small pirate cells had formed across the Caribbean, connected not by hierarchy, but by shared experience. Men and women who had learned from the bloodshed of the previous generation. Strike fast. Leave nothing behind. Trust no one. One such crew attacked a heavily guarded sugar convoy at night, using fog and false lanterns to confuse escorts. Cannons never fired. By dawn, the convoy limped into port, missing half its cargo and unable to explain how. The admiral demanded harsher measures. Soldiers returned to the islands. Informants were paid again. Fear was reapplied like a familiar tool. But something was different this time. There were no famous captains to hunt, no black flags to rally against, no single victory that could be displayed in cages. The pirates had learned. A captured sailor, bruised and bleeding, was brought before a colonial governor. "Who leads you?" the governor demanded. The man smiled weakly. "No one. Where is your base?" "Everywhere." The governor struck him. Still, no answers came. At sea, violence flared unpredictably. A warship vanished in a storm, later found burned and abandoned. Officials blamed weather. Sailors whispered otherwise. An English merchant wrote in his journal, "The sea feels watched again." Years passed. Children grew up hearing half-forgotten stories of Vane, of cages, of flames on the water. To them, piracy sounded like myth, until it didn't. A massive treasure convoy disappeared between Havana and Cadiz, escorted by warships, insured beyond imagination. The loss shook markets in Europe. Questions were asked in royal courts. How could this happen? No one could answer. The truth was scattered among dozens of small crews, each responsible for a piece of the operation. No single blow, no single villain, just coordination. In a quiet bay at night, Tomas Alvarez watched chests being unloaded and divided. His hair was gray now. His hand shook slightly. "We should stop," one of the younger men said. "Take what we have and vanish." Tomas looked at the horizon. "That's what we're doing," he replied. "Every time." He knew the pattern. Piracy rose when empires forgot their cruelty. It faded when the price became too high. It was a tide, not a rebellion. As dawn broke, the crews dispersed again, leaving nothing behind but ripples. The Caribbean returned to calm. Ships sailed. Ports bustled. Governors congratulated themselves. But beneath the surface, the old truth remained unchanged. As long as there were men desperate enough to risk everything, and empires willing to grind them down, the sea would find a way to balance the scales. The ruthless raiders no longer sought legend. They sought survival. And the sea, patient as ever, allowed them both. The dawn broke in streaks of crimson across the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the shattered remnants of what had been the fiercest night of combat yet. The sea, still trembling from cannon fire and the groans of splintering wood, mirrored the tension that had gripped every man aboard the battered vessels. Salt stung the eyes of those who had survived the onslaught, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with brine hung thick in the air. Captain Elias Thorne leaned against the rail of his ship, the Sea Viper, eyes scanning the horizon. The faint cry of gulls carried over the water, yet even these creatures seemed wary, as though the very life of the sea had been wounded. "Gods above," he muttered, his voice rough from shouting commands and the cough of smoke. "We've survived, but at what cost?" Below deck, the crew attended to the wounded with trembling hands. Splints were fashioned from broken oars and scraps of timber. Blood ran freely, pooling onto wooden planks, yet no one flinched. The groan of a young sailor pierced the din. "Captain, I don't think I can walk." Thorne's face tightened. He knelt beside the boy, gripping his shoulder with surprising gentleness. "You will, lad. We all will. The sea spares no one who falters now." Every corner of the ship told its story. The mast had been scorched in last night's broadside. Cannonballs had left deep gouges, splintering timber like the teeth of some sea monster. Yet the pirates had pressed on, not for glory alone, but for survival, for vengeance, for the whispers of gold that had drawn them into these waters long before the British fleet had arrived. In the captain's cabin, maps lay spread across a desk, weighed down with ink pots and sea charts. Thorne's first mate, Gabriel Kane, pored over them with a furrowed brow. "They're not finished, Elias," he said quietly, the candlelight casting shadows that danced across his face. "The British frigates, they'll be back before nightfall. We can't run forever." Thorne tapped a finger against the map. "Then we do what they least expect." His mind raced with strategies born of desperation. A night raid, a sudden ambush among the hidden coves of the Windward Islands, or perhaps drawing him toward the reefs where their ships might splinter against hidden rocks. Every decision was weighted with the knowledge that a single misstep could cost them everything. Outside, the crew murmured among themselves, some praying, others swearing. The first rays of sun glinted off the water, revealing floating wreckage, broken barrels, and the occasional lifeless form of man who had fought bravely until the end. The cries of the sea itself seemed to echo their grief. Yet even amid loss, the pirates moved with practiced efficiency, hoisting sails, patching holes, reloading cannons, preparing for the inevitable next clash. The air was tense with anticipation, but there was also a strange sense of unity. Scarred men exchanged nods and whispered encouragements. They knew that courage was not simply a matter of facing the enemy. It was in facing despair, hunger, exhaustion, and the cold certainty that death could come with the next gust of wind or the next enemy broadside. Suddenly, a lookout's cry rang out. "Sails on the horizon. Starboard side." The word sent a ripple of adrenaline through the crew. Binoculars and spyglasses were raised, scanning the waters. There, in the distance, the silhouettes of British frigates crested the waves like predatory beasts. Their flags flapped in the wind, a sharp reminder of the relentless pursuit that had marked every pirate in the Caribbean since the outbreak of hostilities. Thorne's jaw tightened. "Sound the drums. Ready the men." The command echoed across the deck, bouncing off wooden planks and splintered railings. The pirates moved with precision born of countless skirmishes. Though this battle had taken a toll, it also honed their instincts. Muskets were loaded, cutlasses sharpened, and powder horns checked twice. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant storms, mingling with smoke and salt. Each man understood that the fight would test not only their skills, but their very will to live. And yet, despite fear gnawing at the edges of their minds, they did not falter. Fear was a companion they had grown familiar with, a shadow that sharpened their reflexes and focused their intent. Thorne walked among his men, placing a hand on shoulders, adjusting hats, nodding silently. He knew each of them by sight and by the scars they bore, proof of battles past. "Remember," he called out, voice carrying over the lapping waves, "we fight not for fame, but for the sea itself. Every shot we fire is a promise, to ourselves, to those lost, and to the legacy we carve upon these waters. The crew shouted in unison, a roar of defiance that rolled across the waves, a sound as wild and untamed as the ocean itself. As the British frigates drew nearer, the tension became almost unbearable. The smell of salt and gunpowder mixed with sweat and blood, the cries of injured men, the cracking of rigging, the distant thunder of waves against hulls, all became a symphony of chaos. And then, with a sudden jolt, the first cannonball struck, sending splinters flying in a roar of pain through the deck. Thorne gritted his teeth, raising a spyglass to gauge the distance. "Return fire," he commanded. The cannons thundered in reply, smoke curling into the dawn sky. The first battle of the day had begun, yet it was nothing compared to what lay ahead. Arcs of cannon fire carved glowing paths through the misty morning, while sailors' doves shouted and scrambled to reload. The Sea Viper shuddered as another shot struck her side. Gabriel Kane yelled over the din, "They've underestimated us. Keep the fire steady." Around them, pirates leapt into action, men who only hours before had been terrified now moving with deadly precision. There was an almost ritualistic rhythm to the chaos, the loading, the firing, the ducking, the swinging of cutlasses as boarding parties clashed above deck. Above the roar, Thorne's thoughts turned briefly inward. He saw faces of men he had lost, of men who would never see another sunrise. And yet he also saw courage, resilience, and a defiance that refused to bow. History, he knew, would remember not just the victories, but the price paid for them. In that moment, he understood fully the essence of what it meant to be a pirate. Not merely a raider, but a guardian of their freedom, a soul tethered to the sea with chains of iron and fire. As the first ships maneuvered for boarding, the sea seemed to come alive. Waves rose in protest, tossing the vessels as if to remind men that the ocean, not any flag, held dominion here. And amid it all, the cries, the laughter, the curses, the gunfire, and the flapping sails wove together into a living tapestry of war, a testament to the brutality, the brotherhood, and the sheer, unrelenting spirit of the pirates of the Caribbean. The fight was far from over, yet in that first clash of daylight, the Sea Viper had proven one truth. Fear cannot silence courage, and even against overwhelming odds, a few determined souls could carve legends upon the waves. The morning fog lingered like a ghost over the rippling Caribbean waters, softening the outlines of the distant islands and the jagged reefs that had claimed so many careless ships. The Sea Viper rode low in the waves, her sails torn, her hull battered from the night's clash. Yet the crew moved with a grim determination, tending wounds, patching splintered wood, and preparing for what they all knew would come next. Captain Elias Thorne paced the quarterdeck, his eyes scanning the horizon. Each glance brought a fresh twinge of dread. "The British are not finished," he muttered under his breath, the morning sun glinting off his weathered tricorn. "They never are." Beside him, First Mate Gabriel Kane tightened the ropes of the cannon, his fingers raw and bleeding from hours of toil. "We can't run forever. Elias, soon or late, they'll corner us." The captain's jaw tightened. "Then we don't run. We fight where we have the advantage." His gaze swept over the jagged coastline, hidden coves, coral reefs, and narrow channels, places the British would hesitate to follow. These waters had become both prison and sanctuary for the pirates. Below deck, the crew worked quietly but efficiently. Lanterns swayed over maps smeared with salt and ink, marking the positions of previous encounters and safe havens. Sailors murmured prayers, cursed the heavens, and exchanged tense glances. Each man knew the risks. A stray cannonball, a misstep on the slippery deck, the sharp teeth of the sea waiting to claim the unprepared. Yet despite fear, a certain resilience had begun to take root, a hardened unity forged through shared survival. The smell of gunpowder and salt mingled with the coppery tang of blood from the wounded. Sailors whispered about loved ones back in distant ports, about fortunes lost or stolen, about revenge for comrades taken too soon. Among the chaos, young men found their courage tested. Older men measured their endurance. Each thought, each heartbeat, threaded into a tapestry of anticipation and dread. Suddenly, the lookout's voice shattered the morning quiet. "Sails, off the port bow." A ripple of tension ran through the crew. Binoculars were raised. fingers gripped railings. There, a small squadron of British frigates carved lines into the horizon, moving with calculated precision. Their sails billowed like predatory wings, and the red flags flapped sharply in the wind, signaling that the hunt had resumed. Thorn's face was unreadable, but inside, a storm of thoughts churned. "Ready the men," he commanded. "Every cannon, every musket, every sword. Today, we either break their line, or break ourselves trying." The crew responded with the practiced urgency of men who had faced death and lived to curse it. Powder horns were checked, cannons loaded, and cutlasses sharpened. As the frigates drew closer, the tension was palpable. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and distant storms, mingling with the acrid smoke from the previous night's gunfire. The sea seemed almost alive, heaving in anticipation, tossing small waves against the battered hull of the Sea Viper. Each man felt the pulse of the ocean beneath him, a reminder that here the elements were as merciless as any foe. Thorn walked among his crew, placing hands on shoulders, whispering words of encouragement. He stopped at a young sailor, barely 16, who trembled as he loaded a musket. "Fear sharpens a mind, boy," he said. "Use it. Let it guide your aim, not your steps." The boy nodded, eyes wide, yet a flicker of resolve crossed his face. In that moment, the captain realized that courage was often quiet, born not of absence of fear, but of facing it. The first frigate opened fire, sending a cannonball hurtling through the morning haze. Splinters flew from the deck, and the Sea Viper lurched under the impact. Sailors screamed and dove for cover, while the gunners returned fire, the roar of cannons echoing across the water. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the salty breeze, creating a haze of chaos and destruction. Boarding parties prepared on both sides. The British, confident in their numbers, readied grappling hooks and cutlasses. The pirates, fewer but desperate, sharpened every edge and steeled every nerve. The first wave of combatants met in a clash that sent a shudder through the ship, steel ringing against steel, shouts and curses filling the air. Blood spattered the planks, and men fell, only to be replaced by others moving with a grim determination. Thorn fought with practiced precision, his cutlass cutting a path through the chaos. Beside him, Kane parried a blow aimed at his head and countered with a strike that sent his attacker overboard. The sound of water splashing against the hull was almost drowned out by the din of the battle. Sailors moved with strange rhythm, a dance of survival, strategy, and fury. Every swing, every shot carried the weight of lives, loyalty, and the unspoken code of pirates. Never yield. Amid the melee, Thorn's mind wandered briefly to the sea's vast expanse. He thought of the countless men who had died in these waters, of ships claimed by storms and cannon fire, of the unending struggle for freedom and fortune. And yet, despite the carnage, he saw hope. Small acts of bravery, selflessness, and ingenuity marked every skirmish. A sailor risking his life to save a comrade, a gunnery crew timing their volleys with deadly precision, a boarding party seizing a critical advantage. Hours passed like minutes, the battle ebbing and flowing with the tide. The British pressed hard, yet the pirates' knowledge of the waters, their cunning, and their sheer audacity kept them in the fight. Every victory was temporary, every loss a reminder of mortality. Yet the men endured, their resolve a mirror of the sea itself, relentless, unpredictable, and eternal. By late afternoon, the frigates began to falter under unexpected losses. One ran aground on hidden reefs, its hull screaming in protest as water poured in. Another caught fire, flames licking the sails, forcing its crew to abandon ship. Thorn, standing at the helm, allowed himself a fleeting moment of grim satisfaction. The tide of battle had shifted, yet he knew the war was far from over. The sea, like the men who sailed it, demanded respect, cunning, and unwavering courage. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood, the Sea Viper drifted among the wreckage, sails tattered but spirit unbroken. The cries of the wounded echoed across the water, mingling with the creak of splintered wood and the gentle lap of waves against the hull. Thorn's gaze lingered on the horizon, where the last of the British forces retreated, and he whispered a vow. They would not rest. Not yet. For in the heart of the Caribbean, where fortunes were won and lost upon the edge of a cutlass, Where courage was tested against fire and water, the pirates carved their legacy. Every scar on the deck, every cry, every cannon shot was a testament to a truth as old as the sea itself. Freedom demanded sacrifice, and victory was earned through blood, wit, and an unbreakable will. The night fell, and the survivors gathered to tend wounds, repair the ship, and mourn those lost. Lanterns flickered over faces drawn with exhaustion and pain. Yet even in the quiet, the sound of waves against the hull, the distant cry of gulls, and the occasional snap of rigging reminded them that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, and new chances to etch their names into the history of the Caribbean. Captain Elias Thorne stood alone at the bow, the wind tugging at his coat, the salt sting of the sea on his face. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of life returning to the ship. And in that stillness, he understood something profound. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to face it again and again, to survive, to fight, and leave a mark upon a world that would echo long after the cannons fell silent. The morning light seeped through the lingering mist like liquid gold, illuminating the aftermath of yesterday's chaos. The Sea Viper floated among the wreckage of broken ships, its sails patched with hastily stitched canvas, its deck littered with splintered wood and spent cannonballs. Yet the ship, battered but unbroken, carried the indomitable spirit of those who sailed her. The survivors moved with a quiet urgency, cleaning blood from the deck, tending wounds, and preparing for the inevitable return of their pursuers. Captain Elias Thorne surveyed the scene from the quarterdeck, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of the British fleet. "They'll be back," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Beside him, Gabriel Kane nodded grimly, his hands busy with rope work, tying down a cannon that had shifted from the previous day's broadside. "And when they come, we'll be ready," Kane replied, his voice low but firm. "We've learned their tactics. We've seen their weaknesses." Below deck, the wounded groaned softly, the air thick with the smell of salt, sweat, and antiseptic wine. Sailors whispered prayers to saints and gods alike, some silently, others aloud, as if speaking the words might stave off death itself. A young cabin boy, barely 15, clutched a bandaged arm and trembled. A veteran sailor placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Fear makes the body weak, but courage makes the heart strong," he said. The boy nodded, his wide eyes reflecting both terror and determination. The Sea Viper's crew moved with a practiced rhythm. They patched holes, reloaded cannons, and distributed rations with a careful hand. Every motion carried a weight of urgency. Every glance at the horizon was a reminder that the sea was a battlefield that offered no mercy. The ship itself seemed alive, creaking and groaning as if sharing the crew's resolve, lending its strength to their cause. By midday, the lookout cried out again. Sails, 3 ships, approaching fast from the east. The tension that had been coiled tight across the deck snapped like a bowstring. Sailors scrambled to positions, adjusting cannons, sharpening blades, and checking powder horns. The British frigates were methodical, their approach disciplined, calculated to exploit any weakness. The pirates had survived once, but the sea had a way of turning fortune on a whim. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He motioned to Kane. "We draw them closer to the reef. Let the water do part of our work." Kane's lips curled into a brief, grim smile. "Clever as ever, Captain. Let's see if the sea favors us today." Orders were shouted. Sails adjusted, and the Sea Viper began a slow, deliberate maneuver toward the hidden reef-laden channels known only to those who had lived in these waters. As the frigates advanced, the first cannonball struck, splintering the deck beneath Thorne's feet. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the lethal impact. Around him, sailors ducked, shouted, and returned fire with practiced precision. The Sea Viper shuddered as smoke curled around the masts, and the acrid scent of gunpowder mingled with salt and sweat. Every man fought not only the enemy, but the fear gnawing at his bones, for the ocean was as unpredictable as the foe before them. The battle escalated rapidly. Cannon fire boomed across the waves, each volley shaking the hull and sending shrapnel flying. Boarding parties clashed, steel ringing against steel, shouts and curses filling the air. Thorne fought with lethal efficiency, his cutlass carving a path through the chaos, while Kane directed the gunners with unwavering focus. Around them, sailors moved like phantoms, a mixture of skill, desperation, and instinct guiding their every action. The reef loomed closer, hidden beneath the churning waters. Thorne's plan relied on precision and timing. Too close, and even the sea viper could founder. Too far, and the British would evade the trap. His heart pounded as he shouted commands, adjusting sails, maneuvering with the skill of a man who had spent decades reading the language of wind and water. A cannonball tore through the mainmast, splintering it, yet the crew pressed on undeterred. One sailor, a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar across his cheek, leapt to adjust the sail despite the smoke and debris. Another fired a swivel gun, the shot cutting a line of destruction across the enemy's deck. Each act, small or grand, carried the weight of survival, the burden of legacy. The British frigates drew dangerously close to the reef, their captains unaware of the hidden hazards beneath the waves. Thorne held his breath as the first of their ships struck coral, the hull screeching like a wounded beast. The impact threw men overboard and tore a massive gash in the side. Smoke and fire erupted, sending cries echoing across the water. The second frigate hesitated, attempting to maneuver around the reef, only to fall into the same trap, its cannons rendered useless as it listed heavily. A roar of triumph erupted from the Sea Viper's deck. Sailors cheered, some throwing their hats into the air despite the dangers still present. Yet Thorne remained vigilant, eyes scanning the horizon, knowing that the battle was far from over. One ship remained, smaller but fast, cutting through the waves with deadly intent. Its captain was cunning, refusing to follow the same path into the reef, determined to force a final, decisive engagement. The duel was tense and relentless. Cannons thundered, muskets cracked, and swords clashed as the Sea Viper engaged a remaining frigate. Sparks flew as steel met steel, and the deck became a blur of motion, sweat, and blood. Thorne and Kane moved with the precision of seasoned warriors, their every action calculated to protect the crew and exploit any weakness in enemy. The smaller British ship, though agile, began to falter under the relentless pressure. Hours passed like minutes, the sun creeping low, casting long shadows over the battered ships. Finally, the remaining frigate caught an errant swell, its hull grazing hidden rocks, and the crew scrambled in disarray. The pirates seized the moment, boarding with ferocity and precision. Within moments, the enemy captain was disarmed, the remaining crew surrendering. Thorne stood amidst the chaos, breathing heavily, surveying the aftermath. The Sea Viper had survived, the British threat neutralized for now. The cost had been high, yet the victory was undeniable. Sailors cheered, tended wounds, and repaired damage, the rhythm of life continuing even amidst the wreckage. As night fell, lanterns illuminated the deck, casting flickering shadows over exhausted but triumphant men. Thorne walked among them, nodding silently to those who had fought with unmatched courage. The sea, calm now, lapped gently against the hull, as if acknowledging the resilience of those who had dared to challenge it. And in the quiet, amidst the scent of salt, blood, and gunpowder, Thorne understood a fundamental truth. The ocean demanded sacrifice, cunning, and unyielding courage. History will remember not just the victories, but the bravery, the losses, and the indomitable spirit of those who refused to bow. The night deepened, and the Sea Viper sailed on, a symbol of defiance, resilience, and the unbroken will of the pirates of the Caribbean. Each scar on the deck, each bandaged wound, and each whispered prayer was a testament to the harsh reality of the sea and the men who dared to claim it. The Caribbean night hung heavy over the Sea Viper, a velvet darkness pierced only by the flickering lanterns along the deck and the phosphorescent glow of the waves lapping against the ship's hull. Silence had settled in the wake of the day's brutal engagements, yet it was not a silence of peace. It was a quiet after the storm, a tense, expectant calm, where every creak of timber and splash of water could herald danger anew. Captain Elias Thorne leaned against the rail, eyes tracing the jagged outline of the distant shore. The crew had scattered across the ship, some tending the wounded, others patching sails and cleaning blood from the deck. The night was a living reminder that survival required vigilance, even after victory. Rest, but only enough to keep your senses sharp, he murmured to himself, the wind tugging at his coat and salt stinging his face. Below, Gabriel Kane checked the maps again, plotting the next course through a maze of hidden channels, reefs, and coves. They'll regroup, he said softly. And when they do, They'll be smarter, hungrier. We can't underestimate them. Thorn nodded. Neither can we. But knowledge of these waters is our weapon. We fight on our terms, or we don't fight at all. A distant whistle of wind carried the faint sound of drums from a shore settlement, the rhythmic beat mingling with the murmur of waves. The pirates paused, listening, some muttering superstitions, others dismissing the sound as nothing. Yet even in these fleeting moments, the tension was palpable. Every man knew the Caribbean was a place of endless challenges, where storms, treachery, and rival ships could strike without warning. Suddenly, a shout rang out from the crow's nest. "Sails! Dead ahead!" The call shattered the fragile calm, sending adrenaline coursing through every vein. Thorn squinted into the darkness, spotting the dim outline of a ship moving silently toward them. "Enemy or traitor?" he muttered. The crew prepared instinctively, weapons readied, cannons primed, hearts pounding in unison. As the mysterious ship drew closer, the subtle sound of oars became audible. Thorn's eyes narrowed. "They come under cover of night," he said, realization sharpening his voice. "Boarders, small craft. They think we're tired. They think we'll falter." Kane's jaw clenched. "They've underestimated us before. Captain, not tonight." The first skiff broke from the shadows, oars slicing through the water with eerie silence. Pirates in the boat brandished cutlasses and pistols, their faces hidden under hoods, eyes glinting with malice. On the Sea Viper, the crew braced, muskets raised, blades at the ready. The clash was imminent. Thorn gave the order, his voice cutting through the night. "Hold fire until they reach the rails." Moments stretched, each second heavy with anticipation. The skiff surged forward, splashing against the hull, and men tumbled aboard. Steel clashing with steel, cries of defiance ringing through the darkness. The battle became intimate, savage. Each swing of a cutlass, each musket shot, carried the weight of life and death. Amid the melee, the captain fought with the practiced precision of a seasoned warrior. Sweat stung his eyes, salt and blood mingling as he parried a blade aimed at his head and countered with a strike that sent the attacker overboard. Kane moved beside him, directing gunners and fighting off multiple attackers at once. The deck became a blur of motion, fists, feet, steel, and blood weaving a chaotic symphony of survival. Below, the wounded watched with wide eyes, unable to fight, but keenly aware of the struggle above. Even they felt the pulse of courage, the electricity of danger. Every swing of a blade, every shout, every cry became a story etched into memory, a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The boarding party fought with desperation, but the pirates' cohesion, honed through years of navigating these treacherous waters, held firm. One by one, the intruders were driven back, thrown into the sea, disarmed or captured. The sound of bodies hitting the deck and water splashing overboard mingled with the groan of the ship and the hiss of cannon smoke from earlier skirmishes. When the last attacker fell, silence returned, broken only by the labored breathing of the combatants and the soft crash of waves against the hull. The crew, though exhausted, erupted into cheers, hoisting muskets into the air. Thorn wiped blood from his blade, surveying the aftermath. Every man had fought with courage, yet every victory carried a cost. The deck bore new scars, and more than a few men lay bruised or unconscious. Gabriel Kane approached, his face smeared with grime and sweat. "They'll be back, Captain," he said, voice low but steady. "They'll never stop coming, not while the Caribbean still breathes." Thorn nodded slowly. "Then we continue. We fight smarter, strike harder, and hold the sea as ours." Every ship, every battle, every victory. They remembered the Sea Viper and the men who sail her. A distant lighthouse blinked on the horizon, guiding ships and warning of treacherous reefs. Thorn's eyes lingered on it, a reminder of the fragile line between salvation and doom. The Caribbean was a theater of endless conflict, where courage and cunning were the currency of survival. And for every battle fought, for every life lost, legends were born, etched into the memory of the waves and whispered by sailors in taverns for generations to come. The night deepened, and the surviving crew tended the wounded with methodical care. Lanterns cast flickering shadows across the deck, illuminating faces drawn with exhaustion, pain, and grim satisfaction. Every scar, every cut, every bruise became a badge of honor, a testament to endurance and bravery in the unyielding struggle against both man and nature. Thorn stood at the bow, the wind tugging at his coat and hair, salt stinging his skin. He looked at the horizon, where the faint glow of distant settlements promised both opportunity and danger. In that quiet moment, he understood a truth he had long known. The sea was not a mere backdrop for adventure. It was a living, breathing adversary, testing every man, every decision, and every ounce of courage. As the crew settled for a short, weary rest, Thorn's mind wandered to those lost along the way, the comrades whose names would be etched into memory, whose courage had paved the path for survival. He whispered a quiet vow to them, carried by the wind across the water. Their sacrifices would not be forgotten, their bravery immortalized in the stories of the Caribbean. The Sea Viper sailed onward, battered but unbroken, a vessel of defiance and endurance. Every plank, every sail, every scar told the story of a crew who had faced overwhelming odds and refused to bow. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth remained indisputable. Courage, unity, and relentless determination could carve a legacy even amid chaos, blood, and the merciless waves of the Caribbean. Above, the stars glittered like distant fires, reflecting the indomitable spirit of men who dare to challenge the world itself. And as the Sea Viper disappeared into the night, her silhouette etched against the moonlit sea, it became clear that these were not merely pirates. They were legends bound to the ocean by blood, courage, and an unbreakable will to survive. The dawn broke pale and fragile over the horizon, casting a muted light across the Caribbean waters. The Sea Viper cut through the morning mist like a shadow, her sails tattered but steady, the wake curling behind her like a ribbon of defiance. The events of the past days had left scars not only on the ship but on the men themselves. Faces sunken with exhaustion, hands raw from combat, and hearts heavy with the memory of those who had fallen. Captain Elias Thorn moved across the deck, his gaze sweeping over the crew. Silence hung over them, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was a watchful tension of men who knew the storm was far from over. The surviving British frigates were regrouping, and word had spread to the Caribbean that the Sea Viper had bested them in previous encounters. Now, the hunters had become more determined, more cunning. Gabriel Kane appeared at Thorn's side, a grin set to his jaw. "They'll come tonight," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of certainty. "They've learned, adapted, and they'll strike hard." Thorn nodded. "Then we must be ready. Every cannon, every cutlass, every trap set for them. They will meet resistance they cannot anticipate." The crew moved with methodical precision, tending the damage from the skirmishes, checking ammunition and sharpening weapons. Lanterns swayed gently across the deck, casting flickering shadows over faces lined with fatigue, yet eyes gleaming with resolve. Among the men, whispers of prayer mingled with muttered curses, superstitions passed down from sailors long before them. Fear lingered, but courage, honed in the crucible of survival, burned brighter. By afternoon, the lookout cried out, "Sails! To the north, fast approaching." Every man on deck froze for a heartbeat, then sprang into action. Cannons were primed, muskets checked, cutlasses drawn. The approaching ships were sleek, maneuvering with a deadly grace, signaling that the British had not only regrouped but adapted to the Sea Viper's tactics. Thorn stepped forward, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. "We hold our ground. The reef channels to starboard. We lure them there. The sea itself will fight for us." Kane's nod was brief but resolute. "A gamble," he said, eyes scanning the horizon, "but one we must take. The crew trusts you, Elias." As the enemy's ships drew closer, the wind shifted, carrying the faint cry of gulls, the smell of salt, and the subtle sting of distant gunpowder. The first volley of cannon fire erupted, thundering across the water and sending plumes of smoke curling into the sky. Splinters flew from the deck as the Sea Viper shuddered under impact. Sailors ducked, returned fire, and moved with a rhythm born of desperation and training. The maneuver toward the reefs required precision. One wrong turn could shatter their ship upon hidden coral. Yet the British followed, their arrogance blinding them to the danger. Thorn barked orders, adjusting sails and calling out commands with the authority of a man whose life depended on the skill of every hand aboard. "Steady, steady," His voice carried over the din, a tether of control in the chaos. Cannonballs tore through the morning mist, striking both ship and sea with explosive force. The Sea Viper shuddered under each impact, yet her crew held firm, firing in measured volleys to keep the enemy at bay. Thorn moved among them, parrying attacks, rallying men, and guiding the ship toward the narrow channels where the reefs lay in wait. Sweat mingled with salt on his brow, and each breath was sharp with exertion, but his resolve did not waver. The first British frigate, misjudging the channel, struck a hidden reef. A deafening crack echoed across the water as timbers splintered and hulls groaned. Crewmen fell into the sea, their cries carried away by the wind. A second frigate followed, caught in the same trap, flames licking at the sails as chaos spread across the deck. Thorn's strategy had worked, but the cost was apparent. Blood and bodies littered the water, a stark reminder of the ruthless calculus of war. The final frigate, smaller and faster, attempted to outmaneuver the reefs, circling to flank the Sea Viper. The pirates, anticipating this, prepared a deadly counter. Swivel guns were aimed, boarding nets readied, and muskets cocked. Thorn's voice rose above the roar of the sea. "Hold! Wait until they are within striking distance." The crew obeyed with precision, hearts pounding, every sense heightened. As the enemy drew near, the pirates unleashed a coordinated assault. Cannon fire tore through the frigate's rigging, cutting sails and masts. Muskets cracked, bullets finding gaps in armor and clothing. Boarding hooks caught the rails, and pirates surged onto the enemy deck, steel flashing under the pale sun. A fierce melee erupted, the clash of swords, the cries of the wounded, and the roar of gunfire creating a symphony of violence. Thorn fought at the forefront, his cutlass slicing through the chaos, every motion precise and deadly. Kane moved beside him, cutting down any who threatened their men. Sailors moved with deadly efficiency, trained through fire and blood, exploiting every weakness, every mistake. The smaller frigate, though nimble, could not withstand the relentless onslaught. Within moments, the remaining enemy captain surrendered, and the ship fell silent, its crew disarmed and beaten. As the battle concluded, silence fell over the Sea Viper and the waters around her. The reef channels held, the British threat neutralized, for now. Sailors tended wounds, repaired damage, and allowed themselves a brief moment of triumph. Yet beneath the celebration lay the sober truth of survival. Victory was never absolute, and the sea demanded constant vigilance. Thorn stood at the bow, surveying the wreckage in the calm waters. The Caribbean, vast and merciless, stretched in every direction. He could hear the faint cries of the wounded, the soft lap of waves against the hull, and the creak of timbers settling. Every scar on the ship, every bruise and cut among the crew, told a story of sacrifice and courage. Gabriel Kane approached, his expression a mixture of relief and weariness. "We've held them off," he said quietly, "but they'll return. The sea never forgets, and neither do they." Thorn nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Then we prepare. We endure. We fight. And we leave a legacy that will outlast the tides and the storms." Night fell slowly, casting a silvery glow over the Sea Viper. Lanterns swayed gently, illuminating the weary but unbroken crew. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by the soft groans of the injured and the distant splash of water. Yet in the quiet, a sense of unity emerged, a bond forged through fire, blood, and the relentless pursuit of survival. Thorn remained at the bow, feeling the wind whip through his hair, tasting the salt on his lips, and listening to the ocean's ceaseless song. He reflected on the journey, the battles, the losses, the courage displayed in the face of overwhelming odds. And he understood that history would remember not only the victories but the sacrifice, the unyielding determination, and the indomitable spirit of the men who dared to challenge the Caribbean itself. The Sea Viper sailed on, its silhouette a shadow against the moonlit waters, a testament to survival, defiance, and the relentless courage of pirates. Every plank, every scar, every whispered prayer carried the weight of experience, ensuring that the legacy of this crew would echo across the Caribbean for generations. The first light of dawn painted the Caribbean in muted gold and crimson, glinting off the rippling waves like molten metal. The Sea Viper cut through the calm waters, sails tattered yet filled with wind, her deck alive with the quiet hum of survival. The crew, battle-worn and scarred, move among the wounded, repairing damage and tending to the exhausted. Each man bore the weight of the previous battles in his bones, yet their eyes reflected the same fire that had carried them through every skirmish. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the bow, surveying the horizon. For days, the sea had tested them, demanding every ounce of skill, courage, and endurance. The British forces that had hunted them relentlessly were now scattered, their ships broken, sunk, or surrendered. Yet Thorne knew that this victory was not the end, only a fleeting reprieve. The Caribbean was an unforgiving mistress, and freedom was never granted, only taken. Gabriel Kane approached, a heavy sigh escaping him. "We've survived the worst of it," he said, voice carrying a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "But the sea it never forgets, and neither do the men we faced." Thorne nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No, and neither shall we. Every scar on this ship, every wound we bear, will tell our story long after the battles are over." The crew moved with quiet efficiency. Lanterns swung gently, illuminating faces etched with exhaustion, pain, and grim satisfaction. The wounded were stabilized, sails patched, and the deck scrubbed with the remnants of battle. Each act, no matter how small, was a testament to endurance, to unity, and to the unyielding spirit that had carried them through every storm. As the morning deepened, a distant sail appeared on the horizon. Thorne squinted, hand raised to shield his eyes from the sun. "Reconnaissance," he murmured. "Or another hunter." The crew tensed, muskets and cutlasses at the ready. The sea had taught them one thing above all else: vigilance was survival. The distant ship grew clearer, moving deliberately, its intentions unreadable. Thorne studied it, calculating, anticipating. "Keep formation. Don't give them an opening," he instructed. The crew responded instinctively, every man aware that even a single mistake could unravel their hard-earned victory. Hours passed, the wind shifting gently, carrying with the faint scent of distant islands and the brine of the sea. The ship maintained its course, steady and unbroken, a symbol of resilience against the ever-present threat of the waters and the men who would challenge them. And then, with a sudden, sharp movement, the distant ship altered course, turning away from pursuit. Relief washed over the crew, but Thorne remained vigilant. "They may retreat today," he said, voice low but firm. "But the sea will bring them back, sooner or later. We must be ready when they do." The crew took a moment to breathe, to tend to themselves and each other. Conversations were soft, punctuated by the quiet groans of the injured and the gentle creak of the hull. They spoke of loved ones far away, of fortunes lost and gained, of revenge and survival. And through it all ran a thread of understanding. Their courage, their choices, and their sacrifices had carved a place for them on the map of history. Thorne walked among them, pausing to clasp a wounded sailor's shoulder, nodding silently to another, whispering words of encouragement where they were needed. He moved with the awareness of a man who had seen the edge of death, who had fought and survived, and who understood that leadership was not merely command. It was presence, guidance, and shared endurance. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the sea, illuminating the sea viper's battered but resilient silhouette. Each plank, each sail, each scarred section of the deck was a testament to the trials faced and overcome. The ship itself seemed alive, a partner in the struggle, lending strength to those aboard, echoing the unbreakable spirit of the pirates who sailed her. In the quiet that followed the battle, Thorne allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought of the men who would never see another sunrise, of the blood spilled in the name of freedom, of the lessons carved into the hearts and minds of survivors. He understood fully now that courage was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to face it over and over until survival or legend was achieved. The crew gathered at the bow, watching the horizon together, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. There was no celebration, no triumphant shouts, only the shared acknowledgement of what had been endured and what had been achieved. They had faced overwhelming odds, stared down death, and emerged alive, stronger and united. Thorne raised a hand, the wind tugging at his coat and hair. "Men," he began, voice carrying across the quiet waves, "we have faced the fury of the sea, the wrath of our enemies, and the darkness of night itself. We have survived where others fell. We have fought not for gold alone, but for freedom, for the sea itself, and for the memory of those who cannot fight anymore. Every scar on this deck, every wound we bear, is a testament to our courage. Remember it. Carry it forward. The crew stood in solemn attention, eyes fixed on the horizon, hearts filled with both pride and sorrow. In that moment, the Sea Viper was more than a ship. It was a symbol of endurance, a testament to courage, and a vessel of legacy. Every man aboard knew that the battles would continue, that the sea would never relent, but also that their defiance, their sacrifices, and their unity had etched a place for them in history. As the sun reached its zenith, the Sea Viper sailed onward, cutting through the waves with steadfast determination. The Caribbean stretched before them, vast and merciless, yet the pirates moved forward with unbroken resolve. The past battles were etched into memory, the lessons learned, the courage tested, and the spirit of sacrifice honored. Thorne stood at the bow, eyes scanning the horizon, heart steady. The legacy of the Sea Viper and her crew was secured, not in the fleeting glory of battle, but in the enduring testament of courage, sacrifice, and unyielding will. The Caribbean, in all its beauty and brutality, had witnessed the strength of men who refused to bow, who challenged the tides, and who carved their names into history. The wind carried their story across the waves, whispered by sailors in distant ports, remembered in taverns where legends were born, and inscribed in the hearts of those who dare to follow. And though the battles were far from over, the Sea Viper and her crew had proven that courage, unity, and relentless determination could endure, even amidst chaos, blood, and the merciless expanse of the ocean. As night fell, the stars glittered overhead like distant fires, a mirror of the bravery and resolve that had carried them through every storm. And in the quiet, Thor allowed himself a final thought. History remembers not only the victors, but the courage displayed in the face of overwhelming odds, the sacrifices made for freedom, and the indomitable spirit of those who refused to surrender to fear. The Sea Viper sailed on, a shadow of defiance and legend against the endless horizon, carrying with her the enduring legacy of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will of the pirates of the Caribbean. And in every splash of water, every creak of timber, every whispered wind through torn sails, the story of their struggle, their triumph, and their enduring spirit lived on, a testament to the cost of freedom and the glory of resilience.